Some TV shows entertain you for a moment, others stay in your head for years. And then there's The Twilight Zone, a show that quietly convinced millions of people that reality itself couldn't be trusted. Back when a simple half-hour show could leave you questioning reality, your choices, even your sanity. From 1959 to 1964, one series quietly changed storytelling forever. The Twilight Zone, created by Rod Serling, wasn't just entertainment, it was a doorway. A place where science fiction, mystery, and suspense became tools to explore fear, prejudice, and human nature in ways television had never dared before. Some episodes shocked viewers instantly. Others crept into your mind and stayed there for years. And today, we're diving deep into the hidden side of this legendary show. From behind-the-scenes accidents to creative risks that nearly shut it down, and the subtle details that reshaped pop culture forever. Here are 15 jaw-dropping facts you've probably never heard. Let's saddle up. Number 15. Before The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling was already one of the most respected writers in television. His scripts tackled serious topics, war, injustice, and racism, with a level of honesty that audiences admired. But there was a problem: sponsors. In the 1950s, companies funding TV shows had enormous control over content, and they didn't want controversy. If a script risked upsetting viewers, especially in certain regions, it got watered down or completely rewritten. Serling hit a breaking point after writing a story inspired by a real-life tragedy involving racial violence. By the time it made it through production, everything meaningful had been stripped away. The message was gone. That's when he realized something clever. If he disguised serious themes inside science fiction and fantasy, executives wouldn't interfere as much. So instead of confronting prejudice directly, he turned it into alien invasions, strange curses, and eerie alternate realities. And it worked. The very system trying to silence him ended up giving him the perfect cover. Without that pressure, The Twilight Zone might never have existed. And honestly, if you love discovering hidden stories like this about classic television, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with a friend who still loves mysterious old school shows. Because trust us, the deeper we go into The Twilight Zone, the stranger things get. Number 14. In 1957, Serling wrote a story called The Time Element, a haunting tale about a man who believes he's traveling back in time to Pearl Harbor, just days before the attack. Executives at CBS didn't get it. They thought it was confusing, too dark, and too risky for audiences. So they did what networks often did. They bought the script and buried it. For over a year, it sat untouched, until one producer stumbled across it while searching for material. Against expectations, the episode was finally aired in 1958. The reaction? Overwhelming. Viewers flooded the network with letters, not just saying they liked it, but that it stayed with them. The exact elements executives feared were the reason it worked. Suddenly, CBS realized they had nearly thrown away something special. They gave Rod Serling the green light. And just like that, The Twilight Zone was born from a script that almost never saw the light of day. Number 13. It's hard to imagine The Twilight Zone without that calm, haunting voice guiding you into each story. But originally, Rod Serling didn't want to be on camera at all. He envisioned someone with a dramatic, powerful voice, maybe even a legendary actor like Orson Welles. But there was a problem: the cost. Other candidates sounded too theatrical, too artificial, or just didn't fit the tone. With deadlines closing in, Serling reluctantly stepped in himself. No acting, no over-the-top delivery, just a steady presence speaking directly to the viewer. And that choice changed everything. His grounded, almost journalistic style made the stories feel more real, more unsettling. He wasn't just introducing episodes, he was inviting you into another reality. And that cigarette you often see in his hand, that wasn't a prop, it was real. Serling was known for constant smoking, and it became part of his unmistakable on-screen presence. The man who never wanted to be the face of the show became the one element nobody could replace. Number 12. When you think of The Twilight Zone, you probably hear those eerie, unforgettable notes instantly. But here's the twist: that sound wasn't part of the original plan. In Season 1, the show used a completely different theme composed by Bernard Herrmann, famous for his work with Alfred Hitchcock. It was orchestral, polished, and atmospheric, but it didn't stick in people's minds. It felt more like a classic film score than something unsettling. So, for Season 2, producers wanted something different, something sharper, stranger. Enter Marius Constant, a French composer who had created a collection of experimental music pieces. Instead of commissioning a brand new theme, producers took two unrelated musical cues from his work and stitched them together. That's it. No grand design, no master plan, just a creative splice. And somehow, those jagged guitar notes and uneasy rhythm became one of the most recognizable sounds in television history. Even more surprising, Marius Constant didn't fully realize how famous his creation had become until years later when the royalty checks started growing. Sometimes the most iconic moments in history aren't carefully planned, they're accidents.
Number 11.
Long before they became household names, many legendary actors passed through the Twilight Zone and not in glamorous roles. They struggled, they panicked, they faced the bizarre. Take William Shatner, for example. Before becoming Captain Kirk, he delivered one of the most intense performances in the series, playing a man convinced there's something lurking on an airplane wing. His growing fear, his desperation, it felt real. Almost too real. And interestingly, that wasn't his only appearance involving psychological tension and strange situations. Then there's Robert Redford, who appeared as a calm, mysterious figure representing something far more profound than expected. His quiet performance left a lasting emotional impact. Burgess Meredith became one of the show's most recognizable faces, often portraying thoughtful, vulnerable characters caught in cruel twists of fate. And here's a detail many viewers miss. While some actors starred in multiple episodes, a background performer named Robert McCord appeared again and again in small roles, quietly becoming one of the most frequently seen faces in the entire series. Once you notice him, you start seeing him everywhere. The Twilight Zone wasn't just a stepping stone, it was a test. And the actors who passed through it didn't just perform, they proved they could carry stories that pushed emotional and psychological limits. And if you're surprised by how many legendary actors started in the Twilight Zone, make sure to subscribe right now, because some of the stories later in this video are even harder to believe. Also, share this with a friend who loves classic Hollywood and vintage TV history.
Number 10.
Creating a single episode of television today can take weeks, sometimes months. But the Twilight Zone operated under intense pressure. Most episodes were completed in about 8 days. That includes everything: writing, filming, editing, final production. It was fast, relentless, and sometimes chaotic. Actors often received scripts at the last minute, filled with complex dialogue and philosophical ideas. There was little time for rehearsal. You didn't get multiple chances. You showed up, learned your lines quickly, and performed. Directors had to make tough calls. If a scene wasn't perfect but captured the right emotion, they kept it. Editors worked with physical film cutting and assembling scenes by hand under tight deadlines. There was no room for endless revisions. But here's the surprising part. That pressure actually helped the show. Because everything moved so quickly, network executives had less time to interfere or demand changes. By the time concerns were raised, the episode was already finished. The result? A raw, almost theatrical energy that made each story feel immediate and real. But it came at a cost. Rod Serling pushed himself constantly, writing a huge portion of the series under these conditions. By the time the show ended, he was only in his late 30s but looked far older due to stress and exhaustion. The pace shaped the show's identity, but it also took its toll.
Number 9.
One of the most unsettling things about the Twilight Zone is how sometimes its stories felt a little too close to reality. In one episode, a military officer gains a chilling ability. He can see which soldiers are about to die before it happens. Not through action, not through warning signs, just a subtle, unexplainable signal. And eventually, he sees it on himself. The story plays out with quiet tension, letting the ideas sink in rather than showing everything outright. It's the kind of ending that stays in your mind long after the screen fades. But here's where things take a strange turn. On the very same day this episode aired, the lead actor William Reynolds was involved in a real-life plane accident alongside the episode's director Richard Bear. Both survived, but the timing? It's hard to ignore. An episode about foreseeing death released on the exact day its star faced a life-threatening situation. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's exactly the kind of real-world echo that feels like it belongs inside the Twilight Zone itself.
Number 8.
The Twilight Zone took viewers everywhere, from quiet suburban streets to distant futures, and even moments in history. But here's the reality. They didn't have the budget to build all those worlds from scratch, so they got creative. Familiar backlot sets were reused and transformed. Costumes were borrowed from older productions. Props were repurposed again and again. A futuristic control panel? Sometimes it was just a box with lights attached. But what made it all work was the way it was filmed. Using high-contrast black and white cinematography, the show turned simple sets into something far more convincing. Shadows hid imperfections. Lighting created mood. It didn't need to look real. It needed to feel real. However, there was one experiment that didn't go as planned. At one point, the network tried switching from film to videotape to save money. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it changed everything. The depth disappeared. The shadows flattened. The atmosphere, the very thing that defined the show, was gone. Episodes suddenly felt less immersive, almost like daytime television. Viewers noticed immediately. So the experiment was dropped and the show returned to film. It was a clear reminder, for the Twilight Zone, atmosphere wasn't optional. It was everything.
Number 7.
Despite its creativity, The Twilight Zone was never a big-budget production. Most episodes had to do a lot with very little, but one story pushed those limits. It involved an airplane traveling through time, moving between different eras in a way that required visuals far beyond the show's usual scope. To make it work, the production used a mix of practical effects, stock footage, and one particularly costly addition, a stop-motion dinosaur. The footage wasn't originally made for the show, it was borrowed from another production. Even so, including it came at a significant cost for a series operating on a tight budget. And while it was impressive, it revealed something important. The episodes people remembered most weren't the ones with the biggest visuals. They were the simplest ones. Stories focused on a single room, a single character, or a single idea often left the strongest impact. Because in the end, The Twilight Zone wasn't about spectacle, it was about imagination. And imagination doesn't need a massive budget to stay with you forever. By the way, if you're enjoying these behind-the-scenes facts, don't forget to like the video. It really helps the channel reach more viewers who love classic sci-fi and psychological mysteries. And share this with someone who still appreciates practical effects over modern CGI.
Number 6.
The title, The Twilight Zone, sounds mysterious, almost poetic, but it actually comes from something very real and very dangerous. Among pilots, the Twilight Zone referred to a moment during flight when the horizon disappears. Usually at dusk, dawn, or in heavy fog, the sky and ground blend together into one indistinguishable blur. Without that visual reference, the human body can become disoriented. Pilots might feel like they're climbing when they're actually descending. Everything seems normal, but something is very wrong. That idea, being trapped in a space where your senses can't be trusted, became the foundation of the show. Rod Serling, who had military experience, understood that fear deeply. He realized that true unease doesn't come from total darkness. It comes from uncertainty. From that moment where reality feels slightly off, but you can't explain why. That's what the Twilight Zone represents. A place between logic and imagination. Between what we know and what we fear might be true.
Number 5.
For most of its run, The Twilight Zone was built like a television show trying to push its limits. But one episode quietly crossed a line. It didn't feel like television at all. It felt like cinema. The episode in question came from a rare decision. Instead of building everything from scratch, the production team adapted an already existing French short film created by director Robert Enrico. The story itself was simple on the surface. A naval crew stationed at sea begins hearing strange, unexplained sounds coming from deep underwater sounds that suggest something is still alive far beneath them. But the way it was told changed everything. There was almost no traditional dialogue, no long explanations, no guiding narration from Rod Serling stepping in to explain the meaning. Instead, the story unfolded through atmosphere alone. The camera lingered on faces longer than usual. Silence stretched between moments in a way that felt uncomfortable. Every sound, the wind, the ocean, the creaking of the ship, became part of the storytelling. For audiences used to structured storytelling, this was different, even unsettling, because without constant narration, viewers were forced into a more active role. They had to interpret what they were seeing without being told what to think. And that's where the real power of the episode came from. As the story progressed, tension built slowly, almost imperceptibly. Nothing dramatic happened at first. Just small details, crew members reacting to sounds, glancing at each other, questioning what they were hearing. But the longer it continued, the more it felt like something was waiting just out of view. And then came the ending, a quiet revelation that reframed everything you had just watched. Not through explanation, but through implication. The entire experience shifted in your mind after it ended. What seemed simple became layered. What seemed realistic became uncertain. What made this even more unusual was how it entered the Twilight Zone itself. This wasn't originally created as part of the series. It was licensed and adapted, yet somehow it blended perfectly with Serling's world, almost as if it had always belonged there. That episode proves something important. You didn't need elaborate sets or heavy dialogue to create unease. Sometimes silence itself is the most powerful tool of all.
Number 4.
behind nearly every episode of The Twilight Zone was one constant force: Rod Serling. He wasn't just the host, he was the driving creative engine. Serling wrote a large portion of the series himself, often under intense deadlines. He developed stories, shaped dialogue, and delivered those unforgettable opening and closing narrations. His process was intense. He would pace around, dictating scripts aloud, refining every word, every pause, every emotional beat, but he didn't work entirely alone. Writers like Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont contributed some of the show's most memorable stories. Together, they formed a small but powerful creative circle. Still, the pressure was enormous. By the later seasons, the constant demand began to take its toll. Serling himself admitted that he was becoming exhausted and even worried he might start repeating ideas. And then there's a story that feels like it could have come straight from the show itself. Charles Beaumont, one of the key writers, developed a serious illness that rapidly affected his health and appearance. As his condition worsened, others had to quietly help complete his work so he could continue earning income. It was a difficult and emotional chapter behind the scenes. But despite the challenges, the dedication of this small group of creators gave us stories that continue to resonate decades later, because they weren't just writing fiction, they were exploring the deepest parts of human nature.
Number 3.
Decades after The Twilight Zone stopped airing, most TV shows would have faded into nostalgia, but this one didn't. Instead, it transformed. At Disney's Hollywood Studios, an attraction was built that didn't just reference the show, it rebuilt its entire emotional experience from the ground up. The result was the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. At first glance, it's a drop tower ride inside an abandoned hotel. But what makes it unique isn't the ride mechanism, it's the storytelling layered into every second of the experience. And at the center of that experience is something remarkable: the return of Rod Serling. Using original recordings combined with carefully engineered voice reconstruction by performer Mark Silverman, Disney recreated Serling's presence as the narrator. But this wasn't just imitation, it was synchronization. Every line was designed to match Serling's rhythm, tone, and pacing so precisely that most visitors don't immediately realize where the original recordings end and the recreated performance begins. The goal wasn't just to bring him back, it was to preserve the feeling he created. That calm, measured voice guiding you into something unknown. Even the visuals were carefully designed to match the tone of the original series. The ride doesn't feel bright or modern, it feels aged, slightly faded, like something pulled from another era. Lighting plays a huge role here. Shadows dominate the environment, colors are muted. Everything feels slightly off, as if reality itself has been left unattended. And then there are the details hidden throughout the attraction. Objects that fans recognize instantly, a reference to the devil-faced fortune machine from classic episodes. Broken spectacles reminiscent of Burgess Meredith's iconic role. A mysterious cookbook nodding to one of the most famous twists in the series. Subtle environmental storytelling designed to feel like lost fragments of old television episodes. Even small choices matter. For example, in original footage of Serling, he often held a cigarette while narrating. Because modern standards wouldn't allow it, the object was digitally removed, but his hand position was preserved. That creates a strange effect. His hand is still there, shaped as if something is missing. It's a small detail, but it adds to the uncanny feeling that defines the entire experience. What makes this attraction fascinating isn't just the technology, it's the idea behind it. A TV series that once existed only on screen has now become something physical. Something you can walk through. Something you can experience in real space. And in a way, that's the ultimate evolution of The Twilight Zone. A story that refuses to stay in one form. And if The Twilight Zone still gives you that strange feeling decades later, subscribe for more deep dives like this. These stories aren't just TV history anymore, they've become part of pop culture itself. And chances are someone you know would love this video too, so send it their way.
Number 2.
When The Twilight Zone ended in 1964, television wasn't seen as something that lasted forever. Shows aired, maybe reran once, and then disappeared. So when CBS offered Rod Serling a deal selling part of his ownership in exchange for a large upfront payment, it seemed like the smart move. At the time, it was a significant amount of money. Enough to secure stability. And Serling accepted, but what no one fully predicted was syndication. As the years passed, The Twilight Zone didn't fade away. It grew. Reruns became a staple. New audiences discovered it again and again. The stories didn't age. They evolved with each generation. And that ownership stake? It would have been worth an enormous fortune over time. Instead, the long-term profits went elsewhere. It's the kind of twist ending Serling himself might have written a decision that makes perfect sense in the moment, but reveals its true cost years later.
Number 1.
Most television shows end with credits, a clear stop, a clean break between story and reality. But the Twilight Zone did something very different. It didn't just end episodes, it often left viewers inside them. One of the most memorable examples came from the show's visual design choices in its later seasons. Instead of traditional static credits, some episodes transitioned into a swirling hypnotic spiral, a looping visual pattern that seemed to pull inward endlessly. At first glance, it looks simple, but its psychological effect is much deeper. The spiral doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like motion without resolution, a cycle that continues even after the screen fades. And that's exactly what made it so effective. Because by the time the episode finished, viewers weren't just thinking about what they had watched, they were still mentally inside it. That lingering sensation was intentional. Rod Serling and his creative team understood something powerful. Stories don't really end when the screen goes dark. They continue in the viewer's imagination. And the spiral visual reinforced that idea visually. But beyond the credits, this concept existed in the writing itself. Many episodes were structured not like traditional stories with clear resolutions, but like thought experiments. Instead of answering every question, they often introduced a concept, explored its consequences, and then left key questions unresolved. That lack of closure created something rare for television at the time: afterthought. Viewers would finish an episode and continue thinking about it long after it ended. Not because everything was explained, but because it wasn't. That uncertainty became part of the experience. Even reruns didn't weaken that effect. If anything, they strengthened it. Each viewing revealed something new or made a previous interpretation feel incomplete. This is why the show continues to feel relevant decades later. Because the real subject of the Twilight Zone was never monsters, aliens, or time travel. It was perception, how fragile it is, how easily it shifts, and how quickly reality can feel unfamiliar without changing at all. That spiral wasn't just a graphic. It was a statement. The story doesn't end here. Now, before we get into this one, if you're enjoying these hidden facts about the Twilight Zone, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because this next story, it's something straight out of the show itself.
Bonus.
There's one subtle detail in the Twilight Zone that most viewers never consciously notice, but it quietly connects the entire series together. Unlike traditional shows, the Twilight Zone didn't have a shared cast or ongoing storyline. Every episode was its own separate world, with different characters, different settings, and completely different realities. But there was one invisible thread tying everything together: the tone of uncertainty. In nearly every episode, there's a moment where reality stops behaving the way it should. A machine predicts the future. A town turns against itself. A quiet person discovers something impossible. A familiar place suddenly feels unfamiliar. And just when you think you understand what's happening, the story shifts. That pattern wasn't accidental. Writers like Rod Serling, Richard Matheson, and Charles Beaumont intentionally built episodes around one core idea. No matter how normal life looks on the surface, it can change instantly. That's why the show still feels cohesive, even without recurring characters or storylines. Because the real connection isn't in who appears on screen. It's in the feeling every episode leaves behind. That quiet sense that reality is always just one step away from breaking. And there you have it, 15 incredible facts about the Twilight Zone that prove just how groundbreaking this series really was. Now we want to hear from you. Which facts surprised you the most? And which episode stayed with you long after it ended? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this video brought back memories or made you see the show in a whole new way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still enjoys classic television. Because some stories never fade, they just wait for the right moment to begin again.